Today on BRStv we're going to start a new series of demos on aquascaping. In this episode we're going to focus on Pukani rock. Pukani is a very light, porous type of rock which really lends itself to a lot of easy aquascaping techniques. So Pukani rock on its own is pretty cool as it is, and you might be thinking you'd love to have an entire tank full of rock that looks like this, and I'd understand why. However, there's no reason we can't make it look even cooler. And in this episode we're going to show how to create a few cave effects as well as a cool pillar effect and make the overall aquascaping a more natural, seamless look. So we are going to need a few tools for this. The first thing that we'll need is a hacksaw. We'll also need some chisels. I've had pretty good luck using wood chisels because they have a nice sharp end. The one that I use the most is going to be the thinnest and smallest of them. I like to make sure it has a nice long neck on it. And you're also going to want a hammer or mallet of some type, preferably something that has some weight to it. So before we begin, you absolutely should know there is a learning curve to this, and you should be prepared to break a couple of pieces in half while you figure it out. However, most of those pieces can probably be epoxied back together, and then hopefully this video will help you avoid most of that. So let's start with the pillar effect. There are a lot of pieces like this one where it's kind of long and it starts small, ends up big on the other side. You can obviously just lay it down on its side, which is okay for some things. And sometimes you can put it down on the big side. However, it's probably going to be pretty wobbly and not very stable. It also isn't the way that really looks natural to me. Looks more like a mountain. To me, I'd much prefer that it stood up this way. This actually looks the way a coral or a tree would grow, where it starts out small at the bottom and gets bigger. Problem is there's no way we could ever possibly get this to stand up straight. However, if we cut the bottom off and make a nice flat surface, it's going to be pretty easy. So I just want to eye up my piece of rock here and make sure that I'm going to cut it in a place that will make it stable. I think I probably only need to cut off about 1.5 inches on the bottom here to achieve that. I'm going to speed the actual cutting up for you, but you can see the hacksaw glides through this pretty easily. It's probably only about 45 seconds. You want to make sure that you get that last little bit of nub off the end so it balances right. So as you can see, this piece turned out really well. Has a really nice three-dimensional look to it. However, most importantly, I think that this piece looks really natural, which means that it's going to fit into basically any aquascape. So now that we've seen how well that worked with the pillar effect, we can apply that same basic concept to basically any shape where we want to create a nice flat, stable bottom. For instance, this piece looks kind of round. However, if you tilt it up a little bit, it has a nice foot here where it creates a kind of cool overhang. If we chop off the bottom at an angle, we might be able to create a really nice stable bottom for it and a unique looking aquascape. So with this piece we need to do something a little different because one side's going to be so heavy. We're going to want to cut the bottom off at an angle to make sure that it supports the weight properly. We'll speed this up again real quick and just make sure that we're trying to cut it nice and straight so it does produce a nice flat bottom. So this piece turned out really cool as well. There's a nice overhang over here, and even though it's pretty lopsided with a lot of weight over here, that nice flat bottom is providing the stability that it needs to stand up on its own. Next up, we're going to create a cave-like effect in a few pieces of rock. Now most people like caves, however sadly it's not a very natural formation in a single piece of rock. So we typically have to stack together a bunch of pieces of rock to create that cave. There is another option. We can use a hammer and a chisel to actually create our own caves. In most types of rock that would be pretty hard. However, with this Pukani, because it's so light and porous, it's actually not that hard at all. So what I'm going to do here on this piece of rock is actually chisel a hole right here all the way through to the other side. Now it's not going to be a true cave, it's going to be more of an archway, but when we set it down on the bottom of the tank, it's going to give that cave-like effect. So this is more of an art than it is a science, but I can give a few tips here. The first one is, before you start working on the rock, try to really visualize where you want this cave to go. In my case, I want it to start right here and then snake on through the rock. Try to avoid putting it in the center because it doesn't look very natural in most cases. And with your tools, try to avoid hitting directly down because the rock is going to absorb the full impact of the hammer, which can take off more than you want and maybe even split the whole rock in half. So when possible, I try to hit sideways, which is less likely to do that. So while I'm chiseling here, I thought I would throw in a few more tips. I guess the biggest thing is to try and go slow, only remove tiny pieces at a time. I also pay close attention to the portions I absolutely don't want to remove, either because it will hurt the overall look or because it's part of the rock that is holding the structure together. You can also see I'm occasionally shaking the rock to get the tiny pieces out so I can see what I'm doing and make sure they're not in the way of what I'm trying to remove. You also want to work from both sides and take frequent breaks to see how you're doing. We want to make sure we are removing the right portions. Lastly, start with a plan but follow your artistic vision as you go. When I started this piece, I planned on creating an archway. However, as I saw the cave take shape, I changed my mind and decided I was going to create a true cave all the way through the rock. So this is what we ended up with, and I think it turned out pretty good. One of the nice things about Pukani is the natural shape actually hides the fact that we chiseled this through the middle of the rock, and it actually looks really natural. I think the fish are going to enjoy this, and it's going to look good in basically any aquascape. So these are our 3 finished pieces together. I think it's fairly easy to see how far a little bit of effort can go if you're willing to take the risk and modify the rock a little bit. So that's it for this episode. In our next installment of the aquascaping series, we're going to show some tips on aquascaping the Reef Saver rock. Reef Saver rock is one of my favorite types of rock because it is so easy to aquascape. If you want to make sure that you're notified when it comes out, subscribe to our YouTube channel or newsletter. Thank you for watching BRStv.